I'd like to read you an excerpt from Adrienne Marie Brown's essay, What Is and Isn't Transformative Justice? How can we pivot towards practicing transformative justice? How do we shift from individual, interpersonal, and interorganizational anger towards viable, generative, sustainable, systemic change? How can my real-time actions contribute to transforming the situation versus making it worse? This question feels particularly important in the age of social media, where we can make our pain viral before we've even had a chance to feel it. Often, we are well down a path of public shaming and punishment before we've had any facts about what's happening. That's true of mainstream takedowns, and it's true of interpersonal grievance. We air our dirt not to each other, but with each other, in specific but nameless rants to the public and to those who feed on our weakness and divisions. Again, there are times when that kind of calling out is the only option, particularly those with great privilege who are not within our reach. But if you have each other's phone numbers or are within 2 degrees of social media connection, and particularly if you are in the small percentage of humans trying to change the world, you actually have access to transformative justice in real time. Get mediation support, think of the community, move towards justice. Real time is slower than social media time, where everything feels urgent. Real time often includes periods of silence, reflection, growth, space, self-forgiveness, processing with loved ones, rest, and responsibility. Real-time transformation requires stating your needs and setting functional boundaries. Transformative justice requires us at a minimum to ask ourselves questions like these before we jump teeth bared for the jugular. I think this is some of the hardest work. It's not about pack hunting an external enemy. It's about deep shifts in our own ways of being. But if we want to create a world in which conflict and trauma aren't the center of our collective existence, we have to practice something new, ask different questions, access our curiosity about each other as a species, and so much more. I want us to do better. I feel like we are responsible for each other's transformation, not the transformation from vibrant, flawed humans to bits of ash, but rather the transformation from broken people and communities to whole ones. I believe transformative justice could yield deeper trust, resilience, and interdependence. All these mass and intimate punishments keep us small and fragile. And right now, our movements and the people within them need to be massive and complex and strong.
A long time ago, I acted in a play called Rashomon. Maybe you've seen Kurosawa's 1950 film version. It is a Japanese samurai story that begins with a violent event in a forest. A samurai has been killed. Instead of telling us what happened once, the play tells us 4 different versions of the same moment. We first hear from the bandit, who claims he fought the samurai in a brave, honorable duel. Then we hear from the wife, who says she was terrified and fainted only to wake to find her husband dead. Then we hear from the samurai himself, speaking through a medium, who says he took his own life. And finally, we hear from a simple woodcutter, a bystander, who describes a clumsy, panicked struggle with no heroes at all. Each version sounds believable when you're hearing it, but they can't all be true. And the point in this play is not to pick which one is right. The point is to show how fiercely humans cling to the stories that make us feel safe and right and legitimate, how our identities and fears shape what we think we're seeing and experiencing, and how truth becomes slippery when it's filtered through emotion. Rashomon is fiction, but what it reveals about human truth-telling, about fear, ego, bias, and perspective is very real. And fiction like this becomes a mirror we hold up to real life. Because when crisis hits, we often don't agree on what we're seeing, even when we're looking at the same footage. In that vein, I've been thinking about this story this week, watching the reactions to the murder of Renee Nicole Good. My immediate reaction, as I'm sure is the case so many in this room, is that this was very clearly a profound and horrifying act of injustice. But as the hours and days unfurled, something very interesting and disturbing happened. The Rashomon effect played out in real time. Different clips, different angles, different explanations, different stories, different thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. And amid all of these competing stories, right at ground zero in Minneapolis, UUs responded immediately and courageously. Reverend Ashley Horan, the UUA's vice president for programs and ministries, lived a block away from the site of the shooting. She began live streaming as ICE agents escalated their show of force, and dozens of UUs showed up wearing their Side with Love stoles, standing with neighbors, protesting in the streets, and offering water and masks as chemical irritants were fired into the crowd. The response rippled from there. Parents and grandparents in that UU congregation walked children to and from school so families would feel safe. Others delivered groceries to people afraid to leave their homes, and people formed vigils, rapid response networks, and mutual aid groups within hours. Reverend Horan said, "When any force is coming after our neighbors, we are morally compelled to show up, and that is what I'm witnessing in my community." She also says, "If you feel helpless, don't. There is a role for you, and the time is now to get involved." This is what justice looks like in real time: bodies and presence and courage and care. And at a moment when our nation splinters into incompatible stories, UUs in Minneapolis are indeed demonstrating that all life is sacred, that every person has inherent worth and dignity, and that we side with love, especially when it's difficult, especially when it's dangerous, and especially when it matters most. And I'd like to pause here and widen the perspective, because adults are not the only ones trying to make sense of this. This week also reminded me how essential it is to include younger voices. Talking with Nora this week reminded me that parenting a smart, curious, justice-minded teenager is its own kind of transformative justice. And it showed me that justice grows stronger when we learn with the next generation, not for them.
As I'm growing up, I find that I'm constantly trying to understand the world. And it's really confusing when I see the country respond to something like this week. It makes me wonder, makes me worried, for what it could mean for our future. It can feel overwhelming, like nothing I do or I think really matters. However, I am starting to think that justice doesn't begin with having the whole picture. Maybe it starts with being honest about what I can see. About staying curious instead of shutting down. In that sense, justice isn't some perfect, polished thing that everyone suddenly knows how to do. It's trying, and then learning, and then trying again, in the way we talk to others, in how we listen, and in what we choose to stand up for, and in acting brave before we feel ready. It's kind of like learning a new instrument. You're supposed to squeak and play the wrong notes and just sound terrible for a while. That's just part of learning. And maybe practicing justice isn't that different. Maybe practicing justice is like that too. You can't get better at it if you only practice it in silence. You have to be willing to try out loud, even when you're not perfect. Something else I've been thinking about is what it means to grow up in a world where moments like this are becoming normal. My generation has never known a world where we don't have without access to violent videos on our phones, or without people constantly fighting online or in person. Sometimes I worry about what that does to us, not just emotionally, but morally. I don't want to become someone who gets used to cruelty. I don't want to stop believing that things can actually get better. And because I'm young, I don't always know where I fit. I can't vote yet. I can't change federal policy. I can't fix the system. My opinions don't matter when it counts. I'm just a kid. It can feel paralyzing, and injustice relies on people getting tired or numb or ignorant. We're convinced that nothing can change. Authoritarian movements grow when regular people give up. I don't want my generation to be so exhausted that we stop noticing what's happening around us. So I've just got to focus on what I can do. I can choose the kind of person I'm becoming. I can choose who I talk to people, what I pay attention to, who I stand up for, and when I tell the truth, even if my voice shakes. I can stay involved and work towards a better future for us, even if it's only tangible in small acts of leadership, like being a part of student government or leadership councils, or even just up here. These choices might feel small, but they're real. And maybe that's where justice can start to take shape. We saw that earlier, when the boy in a bike like Sergio's went through a messy, imperfect journey to do the right thing, which he figured out in real time. But it shows us that kids can be brave enough to create change, even when it feels uncomfortable. And justice is so often like that, not instant or heroic, but unfolding slowly as we keep choosing what's right. That's why the idea of justice as practice, not perfection, matters to me. Justice isn't just useful in the moment, but in the long, imperfect time that follows afterwards. A lot of this reminds me of the George Floyd murder. Even though I was only 9 when that happened, I still remember how the whole country seemed to wake up at once. And it wasn't just the event itself. It was all that happened in the moments that followed that helped change the country, that lasted for years. Part of me hopes this moment can do something similar. I hope it shakes us awake again. I hope it pushes us to keep asking harder questions, to keep paying attention, and to keep choosing the kind of people and communities we want to be. Not perfectly, but practice by practice.
Something else I've been thinking about is how we often confuse certainty with justice. We want people to be sorted neatly into righteous and wrong and villain and victim. But life isn't that clean, and we aren't either. Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And real love is rarely tidy. It grows through mistakes and repair and conflict and misunderstandings. It grows in the place where we stay present long enough to ask the harder questions. When we witness harm or feel grief, we often crave quick solutions. We want clarity and accountability. We want justice to be decisive and immediate. But justice that transforms and justice that heals often requires a different tempo. It asks for time, for reflection, for conversation. Justice isn't lightning fast. It's real time, and as Adrienne Marie Brown reminds us, real time is slower than internet time. It asks for that listening, for boundaries, and for rest, and grief, and courage, and often for silence. Not giving up, but giving space. And research shows us that people grow when they feel safe enough to be honest. Because if justice is something that we practice, not something that we perform perfectly, then the biggest threat to justice isn't confusion or disagreement. It's the feeling that we are only allowed to show up if we already have it right. And that's what shame does. Brené Brown reminds us that shame, not guilt, but shame, is one of the greatest obstacles to justice. Shame makes us hide. Safety lets us tell the truth. and truth is where accountability begins. So justice is not only a moral stance, it's a psychological and relational process. Safety leads to honesty. Honesty allows for accountability. Accountability opens the door to repair. And repair is what makes transformation possible. Every scholar of moral development points to the same truth. Justice is relational. It's not just about rules or outcomes. It's about connection and empathy, relationships, and the willingness to return to one another even after harm. Which is why our everyday interactions matter so profoundly. Justice doesn't just live in courtrooms or headlines. Justice lives in the micro moments, in how we speak, in how we listen, in how we treat each other. And I think we've all had enough micro moments this week to last us through February, but it means that we all have plenty of opportunities to practice. Before we close, I want to return to the power of language, because sometimes poetry can hold what straightforward words cannot. National Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman wrote a poem this week that holds both grief and the fierce insistence that even in devastation, something in us can rise. They say she is no more, that her absence roars, blood blown like a rose, iced wheels flinched and froze, now bear riot of candles, dark fury of flowers, pure howling of hymns. If for us she arose, somewhere in the pitched deep of our grief, crouched our power, the howl where we begin, straining upon the edge of the crooked crater of the worst of what we've been. Change is only possible, and all the greater, when the labor and bitter anger of our neighbors is moved by the love and better angels of our nature. What they call death and void, we know is breath and voice. In the end, gorgeously endures our enormity. You could believe departed to be the dawn when the blank night has so long stood, but our bright fled angels will never be fully gone when they forever are so fiercely good. May her words deepen our courage and call us toward the world that we are trying to build. And may they remind us that justice is the practice of continuing to show up, even when the way forward is unsure. And with that, we turn to another poet, one who reminds us that the questions themselves can guide us. The answers we seek aren't handed to us fully formed. We discover them as we practice, as we listen, and as we